Greetings everyone. In the example we're going to show today is all about aggregation. Aggregation is that one object has as an attribute, another objects. And in the demo we're going to look at today, we're going to look at a class person. And I want you to be aware that a person has an age, first name. They also have a work address and a home address, as well as the last name as their attributes. Now note here that the person class has an address. In fact, it has two addresses. And so if we go look at the address class, our address has a street, city, zip, and state. Now in this example, our person is going to actually have two addresses. They're going to have both a work address as well as a home address. And typically people have an address that they work at, possibly, and an address that they live at. So here we're going to use two addresses within the class person. Now let's actually go look at our classes that we construct. All right, first of all, we're going to jump over. We're going to take a look at our person class, our address class. Our address has got four private variables: street address, city, state, and zip. Additionally, we've got our getters and our setters for the attributes that this class has, followed by our constructor. Now, our first constructor that I want to look at is going to be our parameterized constructor. That's essentially where we could hand it the street address, the city, the state, and the zip as parameters, and we would populate our class fields or our class attributes with the parameters that were sent to us. We're also going to have an actual default address. In other words, we may want to create an address, but we don't know what any of the values are. Now, something super important here is because this class address will be used or aggregated within another class, the person, we want to create a copy constructor. And what I want you to know is that when an object is passed as a parameter, it is a pass by reference. So what we want to do is we actually want to sort of emulate a value pass. We want a deep copy of the address. So here, this particular constructor, it returns an address. And what does it take as a parameter? It takes an address as parameter. And what we're doing is we're copying across to this instance of an address, our parameters instance of the address. Each individual element we're copying across so that we actually have a deep copy of this particular object. Now this is important when we pass an address to a class as a parameter. We want to make sure we have a full copy, an actual copy of it, an actual instance of an address, and not a reference. Additionally, in here, we're overriding the toString. We're kind of formatting it such that it would actually print a nice address out in the console to the user. Now we're going to look at our person class. Okay, person's got a first name, last name, and an age. Additionally, the person has a home address and a work address. So they have two addresses. So this class person has a address, home address. This class person has a address, a work address. Now let's go look at our constructors. In here, we're going to have our default constructor for a person. Clearly, we would create a person. We might not know their name, their age, and likely we would not know their address. So I'm creating an instance of an address, the home address, by invoking the default constructor of the address class. Additionally, I'm doing that for the work address. Now here's where it becomes very important. In here, I'm going to have a parameterized constructor of a person, okay? And I'm passing it first name, last name, age. Additionally, I'm passing it the home address and the work address. And here I'm actually passing it to objects. And if you'll remember, objects by default are passed by reference. We actually get a reference to them. We don't. So we want to avoid that. What we want is for our person to actually have its own version of home address and its own version of work address. We do this by copying across whatever address was given to us. Here we're doing our deep copy. Again, we're using the address constructor for the home address and the address constructor for the work address. Now, we'll show you the run of this, and you can see how it works when we get to our driver. And then I'll actually go and show you what happens in the event that you actually don't use a copy constructor. One of the side effects or unintended consequences that you may get by not actually including a copy constructor when you're passing a parameter to another constructor. All right, so we got get first name, set first name, last name, person age, get work address. Also, my setter for my work address, I'm actually invoking the copy constructor again because I'm sending this in as a parameter, okay? And I actually want this work address to have its own version of that address that was passed in as a parameter. And I'm doing the very same thing for my set home address setter. I've got a toString here, printing out the first name, last name, age, kind of setting them up so the user can see it. So let's go over to our driver and let's see what we're doing here. Okay. First of all, I'm going to create two instances, or actually not instances, but I'm reserving in memory my person, that'll be our person 1, and then my person 2. In here, I'm showing you two addresses. I'm creating a work address and a home address object. Followed by, I'm now going to create my two persons. So I have my first person. This is going to be Kevin, age. Now I want you to notice that I'm setting the work address to 123 Fredericksburg Avenue. Home address, 45 2nd Street. And I'm creating another person, and I'm also giving them the same work address and the same home address. So in this setup, let's assume that both Kevin and Cecilia live and work in the same place. Then I'm going to output my objects, okay? And let me comment this out so we can actually isolate what's going on. We're going to run it. And as you can see here, we have our first person, okay, age 39, home address and work address. And then we have our second person, Cecilia, age 38, home address and work address. And if you'll remember, we set the work address and the home address to the same location, okay? Now in this scenario, in our little setup here, what we want to do is I'm actually going to say, while Cecilia and Kevin worked in the same place, Cecilia is actually, her work address is going to be changed. She got transferred to a new office. So here I'm going to change persons to work address. So I'm going to select my person 2. To change the address, I have to use the getter to the get work address. In other words, I want the work address for Cecilia. Once I have that, I'm going to use the setter to change the city to Austin, zip code, and the street address that she'll be working in Austin. So she gets transferred to our Austin office. And then I'm going to print out both of them again so that we confirm everything is as expected. So I'm going to run the code here. Okay. Now I want you to notice when I originally printed them out, yes, they both work in the same address and they both live in the same address. We have our home address and work address. Now we're changing persons to work address. Okay. You'll notice here Kevin still works in San Antonio, but now Cecilia, we've changed her work address to Austin. That's as expected and as we want. This is possible by using a copy constructor. Okay, I'm going to go back to the person class. If you remember when I created my person, let's scroll up and see our constructor, that we actually used the copy constructor so that we got an actual copy of the work address. What I'm going to do is now make it to where what you might think would work, and we'll see the side effects. this work address equals the work address that I'm handing it. Okay? Now what I want you to notice here is I'm not actually creating a work address. This is actually a reference to the work address that was passed to me. All right, so I've removed the use of the copy constructor, and you're going to actually see what the side effects are that I'm not actually using it. So I'm going to go back to my driver. Now remember, in our scenario, they were both working and living in the same location. However, Cecilia now got transferred to the Austin office, so we're actually going to change my person 2's city, state, and zip to the work address of the Austin office. Now let's run it and see what happens. We're going to run it here. And let's take a look at our original. That is correct. They both live and worked in the same place. I'll give you a second to take a look at it. Now, after we've changed it by not using a copy constructor, let's see what happens. Okay? Well, Cecilia's work address is now correct because we changed it, 444 East Street, Austin, Texas. But a side effect to that is that Kevin's work address also got moved to Austin. So you might ask, why did this happen? This happened because we did not use a copy constructor. Work address here is actually a reference. And if you remember, this would now be a reference to the work address object in my person class. Okay? And because it's a reference, I'm actually changing the work address for everybody. So clearly it's an unattended side effect. So with that being said, that is actually why you want to use copy constructors. As you can see here, they both ended up being moved to Austin. If I do this correct in my person class, I'm actually giving each person a brand new address so that I can affect each one individually. So I'll run it, go back over to my driver. I'm going to run it now. Now let's take a look at it. Okay, our original setup, both Kevin and Cecilia both worked on Fredericksburg, 45 2nd Street. They both lived on Fredericksburg. Then, if you remember in the code, I actually changed. Cecilia got promoted, and she gets moved to the Austin office. So after we made the change, as you can see, Cecilia is now in the office of the Austin office. However, I didn't have an effect on Kevin's work address. Why? Because I was actually using its own version of the work address via a copy constructor. So, as a rule of thumb, what you want to consider is anytime you're passing an object as a parameter, understand that it's a by reference pass. So I'm not passing a copy of it, I'm actually passing the memory location where it's stored. So therefore, it's a good practice, especially when you use an aggregation, is that you invoke the copy constructor. Go back and look at it for parameters that are being passed here because they're objects. Okay, thanks for watching this short video. Hope that gives you an explanation of it. Have a great rest of your day.